The blade had just barely cut the skin, yet the wound began to heal at a visible speed. His subordinates confidently introduced this reincarnation subject to Apocalypse. Whenever his life was in danger, his protectors would search for a new body for him in order to achieve immortality. What's even more disturbing is that, while gaining a new lifespan, he also inherits the powers of the host. To this day, even the river of time cannot measure his lifespan, as it seems boundless. Like the world itself, the superpowers he possesses are as vast and unfathomable as the starry universe. As the first ancient mutant to be born on Earth, there's no doubt that Apocalypse, with his immense strength, wields the supreme power to rule all. He is the absolute ruler of Earth. Because of this, he is revered as a deity that transcends the mortal world, and people dare not show the slightest disrespect. Upon seeing Apocalypse, they all kneel at his feet, worshipping this powerful being. Although Apocalypse is omnipotent at other times, during the reincarnation process, he temporarily loses all his defenses and becomes completely powerless. This is his most vulnerable period and his only weakness. When the time arrives, the High Priest officially announces the start of the soul transfer ritual. The slaves outside the tower begin to act. Together, they pull the ropes, and the massive curtain at the top of the pyramid slowly slides down, revealing golden runes that shine in the sunlight. A mysterious wave of energy is released, and it flows along the path carved into the walls, pouring into the pyramid and gathering on the consciousness transfer device. Moments later, the golden substance in the grooves seems to be infused with life, climbing upward along the marks, eventually forming an energy network that lifts Apocalypse into the air. These golden substances, which act as energy conduction mediums, are advanced technology created by Apocalypse through his extraordinary abilities and intelligence. This allows him to download his consciousness like software and transfer it into the body of his chosen host. The entire process is incredibly complex and consumes immense energy, requiring Apocalypse to be fully focused. If there is any external threat, the four horsemen must fight with all their strength to protect him. However, the suffering slaves can no longer tolerate Apocalypse's tyranny. They secretly join forces, silently launching a long-planned coup. The guards outside the tower receive the signal and immediately swing their hammers, destroying the support structure's wooden stakes. Massive stone blocks begin to rumble down the passage. Hearing the sounds, the inside informants quickly activate mechanisms on both sides, sealing all exits and cutting off Apocalypse's escape route. Seeing this, the protectors immediately counterattack, crushing the approaching enemies into piles of bones with a single strike. These guards, who had embraced their deaths, had seen through Apocalypse's false god nature and realized that he was not an invincible legend. Thus, they decided to sacrifice their lives for a brighter future for Egypt. As the boulders continued to slam into the pyramid's support columns, the grand structure seemed to be severed in half, collapsing from the core as if the apocalypse had arrived. The people fled in terror, scattering in all directions. Inside the Golden Tower, rocks continued to fall from the ceiling and walls, and the structural integrity of the entire space was on the verge of collapse. The last surviving guard hid in the corner, waiting for the best moment to strike. At the same time, the reincarnation ritual had reached a critical point. Despite the four horsemen's extraordinary abilities, they could not fully resist this sudden disaster brought on by the falling stones. With the completion of the consciousness transfer, Apocalypse's appearance was completely renewed. The aging body that once held his consciousness withered into a withered shell in an instant. The guard saw the opportunity and launched a surprise attack, but the protector pinned him in midair with mental powers, brutally twisting his body and crushing him into a mass of flesh. As the last supporting column cracked under the boulder's impact, the pyramid could no longer support its own weight and collapsed, burying everything under the rubble. The reincarnation platform lost balance and fell, and the four horsemen suffered severe losses. 3 of them were struck by the falling stones and died on the spot. Only the last female protector remained, steadfast in her duty, vowing to carry out the ritual to the final moment. She once again used her mental powers to strip the armor from Apocalypse's old body and attach it to the new host. Once every piece of armor was in place, she immediately focused her remaining energy to create a protective shield for Apocalypse. But as the pyramid continued to fall, the female protector's body was finally struck by the massive rocks, causing severe impact. Despite the intense pain, she still endured and even overexerted herself, transferring her life force to Apocalypse to keep the shield stable. Under her protection, Apocalypse's physical form remained intact and unharmed, but when a massive rock fell from above and struck her, the energy she was channeling gradually weakened until it was completely interrupted. With that, all 4 horsemen were slain, buried deep beneath the pyramid as it collapsed. Apocalypse, disturbed by the interference, was forced into a dormant state. Despite the passage of thousands of years, his followers still spread across the world. CIA agent Moira traveled to Cairo, Egypt, to trace the origins of mutants. Here, she finally discovered a crucial lead. Following the trail of Apocalypse's followers, she found a hidden courtyard. Because Moira's disguise was flawless, the guards inside were completely unsuspecting. Moira easily approached them and dealt with them in a few swift moves. She then lifted the incongruous rug in the courtyard. As expected, a hidden passage leading underground was revealed. Moira quickly shed her disguise and cautiously descended the stone steps. An ancient and mysterious energy began to fill the air. When she turned a corner, the spire structure of a pyramid came into view. It was clear that this was the site where Apocalypse had once been sealed away. Moira used her camera to record these artifacts marked with Apocalypse's symbols, preparing to bring the photos back to the CIA for further study. Just then, a chanting sound was heard nearby. It was the followers of Apocalypse, gathered together for a sacred ritual to awaken the sleeping Apocalypse. Coincidentally, Moira's intrusion allowed sunlight to seep through the cave's cracks and shine directly onto the pyramid in the ruins. The golden inscriptions, which had been dormant for thousands of years, shone brightly once again under the sunlight. A massive surge of energy began to spread rapidly along the surface of the pyramid, unknowingly completing Apocalypse's final reincarnation ritual. It was as though fate had arranged for this ancient being to awaken from his long slumber. Having just inhabited a new body, Apocalypse was still in the adaptation phase. He began to focus his mind, striving to bring his consciousness and the new body into perfect unity. This was the first step in mastering his new form. Once that was done, he attempted to activate his powers and push the massive stone blocking his path. The surrounding space was soon enveloped by a strong wave of purple energy. In no time, all the giant rocks were lifted into the air, and the ground began to tremble violently. The energy Apocalypse released was so powerful, like a wild horse breaking free, that it spread in seismic waves, causing an unprecedented global earthquake. Moira sensed the danger and quickly fled the scene. At that moment, Apocalypse began to manipulate the particle structure at the boundary between reality and void, creating a wormhole-like portal. In the blink of an eye, he vanished through the portal, leaving the ruins behind. The next second, the once grand pyramid and its devout followers were once again buried deep underground. Moira was the only survivor, while Apocalypse returned to his former domain. Though it was no longer the same as he remembered, the familiar past was gone, replaced by a profound sense of alienation. During his endless years of slumber, the world underwent earth-shattering changes. Technology, society, and culture had all made immense leaps. Everything was completely different from the ancient Egyptian environment he had known. In order to understand the modern world's operating system, Apocalypse began aimlessly wandering through the busy streets. He used his telepathy to search for others of his kind. Soon, his mental senses detected a unique individual, a mutant with special abilities. She rolled her eyes, and the air around her suddenly became violent. Whipping up a strong wind, taking advantage of the merchant's distraction, Storm swiftly grabbed a handful of cash from the stall and disappeared into the crowd. Attempting to escape, the vendor noticed and chased after her with a group of people. Eventually, she was cornered in a narrow alley. Seeing this once revered noble mutant now reduced to stealing to survive, Apocalypse felt intense anger and disappointment. This twisted order of dominance was a great insult to him. He decided to step in and intervene. The reckless vendor, still waving a knife, threatened him to leave. Apocalypse nonchalantly raised a hand, and an unremarkable dust storm immediately swept up behind him. Like a sharp scythe, it instantly severed the heads of several merchants. The vendor was terrified by this horrifying sight and desperately begged for mercy. But Apocalypse showed no mercy. He unleashed his immense telekinetic power, pinning the man to the wall. It was as if he had become part of the wall, a living sculpture. Afterward, Apocalypse followed the storm to her residence, wanting to learn about the distribution of power in the modern world. However, due to their language barrier, they couldn't communicate directly. Apocalypse decided to turn to the television instead. Through the TV, he accessed multiple information sources, including news reports, documentaries, and historical programs. In almost no time, he had a rough understanding of human history over the millennia. He also learned that the world was now dominated by nuclear superpowers. What shocked Apocalypse even more was that the once insignificant humans, whom he had trampled underfoot, now dared to rule the world. Meanwhile, his own kind was marginalized. suffering from ubiquitous discrimination. They could barely survive, struggling in the cracks of society, witnessing his people's miserable situation at the bottom of the social ladder. Apocalypse decided to overthrow the current order. He aimed to reshape the world into a pure new system centered around mutants. He would restore his people's former glory and make them the rulers of Earth, while humans would return to their enslaved status. To achieve this grand vision, he needed to carefully select 4 loyal and powerful protectors to serve as his new 4 horsemen, and Storm was undoubtedly the perfect candidate. Apocalypse discovered the immense potential hidden within her. Seeing that she was someone with vast room for growth, he infused her body with the energy of his own transformative power. This enhanced her weather-manipulating abilities on a genetic level to an epic degree. Thus, Storm was naturally taken in by Apocalypse, becoming one of his horsemen and bestowed with the title of Knight. The two of them then went to an underground information center. There, they found the bald-headed boss, Caliban, who possessed a rare ability to easily sense and locate other mutants. Using this ability, Caliban had established an underground market where he traded mutant intelligence and goods. By selling this information, he had made a fortune. Apocalypse bluntly stated his intent to use his special ability to locate powerful mutants. However, Caliban, who only cared about money, refused Apocalypse's request and even pulled out a gun to threaten them to leave. Apocalypse said nothing, merely using his mind to turn the threatening gun into dust in an instant. The female bodyguard beside him saw the situation and decisively acted. As a mutant herself, she had the supernatural ability to solidify her telekinetic powers into physical weapons. However, Apocalypse's telepathic energy surged unexpectedly, and the light blade she created with her powers became sharper and more resilient. After witnessing the ancient mutant's unparalleled strength, Psylocke decided to submit and voluntarily became one of his horsemen. She then assisted Apocalypse in finding the third powerful mutant, Angel. But at this moment, Angel had given up on himself. His left wing had been irreversibly damaged, leaving him a complete cripple. Not long ago, Angel had gone through a dark period in an underground fighting club in East Berlin. He was captured by humans and forced to fight his fellow mutants in electrified cages, a violent spectacle to amuse gamblers. Over time, this fight arena twisted Angel's mind, and he began to feel a sense of recognition and belonging that he couldn't find in normal society. Without realizing it, he had accumulated a 10-match winning streak. His next challenger was a young Nightcrawler, who had been kidnapped by the Munich circus. He was naturally timid and kind-hearted, always using his teleportation ability in the arena, unwilling to engage in battle with his own kind. However, the electric net in the iron cage left him no way to escape. Nightcrawler hesitated no more. He instantly teleported behind Angel, wrapped his tail tightly around him, and forcefully dragged him toward the electric net, causing a surge of electricity. It was at this moment that Angel's left wing sustained severe damage. Nightcrawler realized his actions had been too harsh and immediately apologized repeatedly, but Angel's anger had reached its peak. He was about to retaliate. At that moment, Nightcrawler's mother, Raven, rushed in an attempt to save her son. She destroyed the electrical circuits in the arena, causing the entire black market to fall into chaos. Taking advantage of the confusion, Raven knocked out the bodyguards and quickly fled the scene with her son. Angel also managed to escape amidst the turmoil. From that point onward, he hid in the penthouse of his mansion, drowning his sorrow in alcohol, attempting to forget the hopeless future of mutants. He couldn't see a future or hope for mutants and became deeply lost in self-doubt. For Apocalypse, this was but a minor issue. He delved into Angel's mind, removing his self-doubt and other psychological barriers. He then injected Angel's body with transformative energy, causing his powers to undergo a revolutionary change. The once damaged wings gradually disappeared, replaced by a pair of steel wings that gleamed with a metallic shine and were full of power. With this, Apocalypse only lacked one more protector, and he had already chosen his ideal candidate, the famous Magneto. However, unexpectedly, Magneto, once a force to be reckoned with in the superhero world, had chosen to retire in Eastern Europe and lived a quiet life. He had abandoned his past glory to become an ordinary steelworker and started a family, with a wife and daughter. To protect his family, he severed all ties with his former life, but his peaceful existence was shattered when Apocalypse awoke. At that time, the earth shook violently, as though the entire world trembled at the awakening of his power. The steel mill where Magneto worked was affected, and a disaster struck. The massive steel furnace suddenly collapsed, heading straight toward the defenseless workers. To save them, Magneto instinctively used his powers to levitate the falling debris. Though he saved his colleagues, his secret was exposed to the public. Magneto rushed home in a panic, urging his wife to quickly pack, intending to escape to a safer place. When they finished packing all the essentials and were about to leave with their daughter, they discovered the room was empty. Suddenly, they heard an unusual noise coming from the forest. They rushed toward the source of the sound. It turned out that their daughter hadn't gone missing but had been taken by the local police. Magneto had lived anonymously in this small town for over 10 years, maintaining humility and kindness, living peacefully with the locals. The law enforcement officers standing before him were, to no surprise, old neighbors who had once shared drinks with him. However, once they learned that Magneto was a mutant, their attitude changed abruptly, becoming cold and indifferent. Magneto knew that any conflict could harm his daughter, so he decided not to resist, voluntarily surrendering to ensure her safety. But in his daughter's eyes, her father had always been righteous and loving. She had never seen him act in any extreme or malicious way. Unable to watch her father being taken by the police, she was filled with strong reluctance and anger. This intense emotional turmoil even caused a resonance in nature. The crows seemed to sense her emotions and began attacking the officers. It turned out that Nina, too, was a telepathic mutant. She could command animals to act according to her will. Her mother noticed that her emotions were on the verge of exploding and rushed to crouch down, trying to calm her. However, in the chaos, a police officer accidentally let go of the top bowstring, and an arrow pierced the bodies of both mother and daughter. Magneto, heartbroken, knelt on the ground, holding their increasingly cold bodies tightly. The sudden tragedy plunged Magneto into immense sorrow. His wife and daughter were the closest people to him in this world, the very meaning and purpose of his life. What he sought was simply the happiness of protecting his family and enjoying an ordinary life. But fate gave him the cruelest response. This injustice pushed his hatred and anger to its peak. Magneto, fully consumed by rage, took his daughter's metal necklace and ruthlessly used it to pierce the throats of every police officer present. He realized once again that humanity's fear and prejudice were deeply ingrained. It was at this moment that Magneto's trust in humanity completely shattered, and he came to the grim conclusion that humans and mutants could never live in peace. After dealing with the police officers, Magneto turned his attention to the workers who had betrayed him. He manipulated metal, sealing off all the exits, determined to make the families of his former colleagues feel the pain of losing loved ones. Just as he had, the entire steel mill began to shake violently, but before he could act, a purple portal appeared behind him. It was Apocalypse and his 3 horsemen. After learning of Magneto's plans for revenge, Apocalypse rolled his eyes dismissively and immediately killed all the workers. He did this not only to showcase his power but also to make a gesture of goodwill toward Magneto. Although Magneto didn't understand his intentions, the irresistible aura emanating from Apocalypse made him unwittingly follow him into the portal. They arrived at the concentration camp, a place full of painful memories for Magneto. This was not only where Magneto's powers had first awakened, but also where his parents had been killed by humans. Apocalypse had specifically brought him here to reignite his deepest hatred and make him feel the pain of being harmed by humans, pushing him to become their enemy once more. Under Apocalypse's guidance, Magneto began to sense the metallic elements deep within the Earth's core. This process was like opening a treasure chest, revealing a massive energy source. As he delved deeper, Magneto was shocked to discover that the power he could control was far greater than he had ever imagined. Memories of his childhood suffering and the faces of his lost family began to resurface. The overwhelming hatred fully unlocked his powers, allowing him to release them completely, reaching unprecedented levels. In an instant, the metals beneath the earth, like awakened steel dragons, erupted from the ground, completely destroying the concentration camp and leaving nothing in its wake. With this, Apocalypse successfully gathered all 4 horsemen under his command, with Magneto leading them as their leader due to his unmatched strength. Meanwhile, at the Mutant Academy, Grey was constantly tormented by nightmares, always dreaming of apocalyptic scenes of bloodshed as soon as she fell asleep. Professor X had intended to delve into her mind but nearly perished in the process. The Phoenix Force within Grey was one of the oldest and most powerful forces in the universe. Compared to Professor's strongest mind, it was as insignificant as a small spell. Combining this with the recent earthquake waves, Professor realized that a powerful evil force was quietly rising. The situation was dire. He immediately headed to the deepest chamber of the Academy, bringing along the new 2.5 version of the brainwave amplifier. Beast pointed out to Professor that the source of the disturbance was in Cairo and helped him calibrate the coordinates. As soon as the amplifier was activated, Professor's telepathic abilities were amplified several times over. Quickly, he pinpointed the source of the problem and unexpectedly discovered an old acquaintance, Agent Moira. They had once been each other's dearests, but Professor didn't want Moira to be dragged into the mutant world's conflicts and dangers. So, he made the difficult choice to erase part of her memory, allowing her to live a peaceful life. Now, in search of crucial information, he had no choice but to risk finding her again. Moira still held the same admiration for him as when they first met. Through her recounting, Professor learned for the first time about Apocalypse, the ancient mutant who had existed for tens of thousands of years. Meanwhile, Raven brought Nightcrawler to the underground marketplace to purchase fake passports for covert operations. Seeing Nightcrawler's generous offer, Caliban threw in a piece of valuable intelligence for free. It was then that Raven learned about Magneto's recent tragedy. His entire family had been killed by humans. Her heart sank, fearing that Magneto, in his extreme rage, would start a killing spree. She immediately informed Professor. After receiving the news, Professor rushed to the chamber. Without the brainwave amplifier, his telepathic abilities were limited to covering only one country, but with the amplifier, his range could extend globally, covering every corner of the world. Through Professor's telepathy, countless white dots flashed like stars, each representing an individual human. Red dots represented mutants. Within 2.5 minutes, Professor pinpointed Magneto's location. He immediately reached out to him and began a remote telepathic conversation. But deep within Magneto, hatred burned like a wildfire. No matter how much Professor tried to persuade him, he could not change Magneto's resolve to destroy the world. As Professor and Magneto continued their conversation, Apocalypse, with the same telepathic abilities, sensed the mental wave Professor had released. Professor also became aware of Apocalypse's presence, and the two powerful minds collided. This was their first encounter. Apocalypse attacked Professor's mind, making him witness visions of the apocalypse. Even the usually calm and composed Professor found himself losing control in the face of Apocalypse's overwhelming power. Beast realized that Professor was in danger and tried to awaken him, but no matter how he adjusted the amplifier, he couldn't shake Apocalypse's influence. Professor's mental strength had already been amplified beyond imagination with the machine. Apocalypse's further enhancement made it even more terrifying. This power perfectly aligned with Apocalypse, as if it were a tailor-made ability, making him feel ecstatic and exhilarated. His ambition to conquer the world was about to begin. He realized that after tens of thousands of years, the superpower he had been most eager to acquire was Professor X. Through invading his consciousness, Apocalypse took control of global nuclear weapons. He wanted to show humanity that he had absolute control over the world's most advanced military force, nuclear weapons. Soon, the personnel in charge of nuclear launches, under mind control, involuntarily activated the launch sequences. All the nuclear missiles were launched into the air, putting on a spectacular fireworks display for the entire world to witness. From that moment, the concept of superpowers in the global landscape would no longer exist, and the world would enter a new era. Faced with this situation, the military was powerless. Even the most important trump card had been easily taken away, leaving no room for resistance. Humanity fell into unprecedented panic, realizing how fragile and vulnerable they were in the face of mutants. Seeing the situation worsen, Professor, regaining consciousness, quickly ordered Havoc to destroy the amplifier. Havoc immediately unleashed his full power, his body becoming an energy cannon, firing highly destructive plasma energy at the laboratory, relentlessly bombing it. Apocalypse, with the aura of someone who had the universe beneath his feet, mockingly demonstrated his disdain to everyone. After all the nuclear missiles were destroyed in space, Professor, relying on Havoc's power, forcibly severed his mental connection with Apocalypse. However, he immediately collapsed. Losing consciousness, they quickly moved the unconscious Professor out of the laboratory, but the next second, Apocalypse, with his 4 horsemen, arrived through a portal. Magneto used his magnetic power, pulling the seated Professor X toward him with incredible speed. Seeing this, Havoc quickly fired plasma energy, but it all happened too fast. The portal vanished just as the laser was fired. The energy wave pierced the wall, and by accident, it hit the energy reaction system of a supersonic aircraft in the base, triggering a massive explosion. At that moment, it felt like time had been paused. Everything around them suddenly froze. A boy with super speed abilities, Quicksilver, appeared. His original purpose was to use Professor to find his father, Magneto. Having grown up with his mother, he had always longed to reunite with his father, hoping to receive the long-missed love and recognition to make up for the lack of family affection in his heart. But he had no idea that fate had led him into the midst of this explosive chaos, and now he had to act quickly to save people from death's grip. If it had been any other X-Man, the Academy would have been lost by now. But for Quicksilver, It was no challenge at all. In less than the blink of an eye, he saved all three. Even while moving at high speed, he could accurately assess his surroundings, dodge obstacles, and respond to sudden situations. However, when it comes to quickly crossing obstacles, these skills become especially crucial. He can accelerate his molecular structure to an extremely high frequency, entering a state of particle vibration. No matter what object it is, he can easily pass through it without a problem. But because he moves so fast, everything around him, moving at normal speed, appears to slow down drastically, almost to the point of stagnation. This phenomenon doesn't mean time has actually stopped. It's simply that his speed is so much greater than the surrounding environments that it alters his perception of time's passage. He may not be the most powerful member of the X-Men, but every time he appears, he always manages to captivate everyone's attention with his unique style and charm, often outshining the main characters. When the students recovered from the shock and realized they were unharmed, they noticed that the school was no more, reduced to a pile of rubble. Everyone was still shaken, and at that moment, all eyes turned to Raven, the woman who had revealed her true form. It turned out that in the days of future past event 10 years ago, her choices and actions had changed the course of history. She had created a future for the younger generation of mutants, one free of sentinels, making a significant contribution to the fate of all mutants. The students naturally viewed her as a spiritual leader and held her in the highest regard. Unfortunately, Havoc was too close to the blast point, and before Quicksilver could save him, he was consumed by the flames and reduced to ash. Upon hearing the tragic news, Cyclops collapsed to his knees in despair, his legs giving way as he cried uncontrollably. At that moment, the rescue team's helicopter arrived on the scene. Gray, using her telepathy, sensed an unusual energy emanating from the helicopter. Sure enough, when the rescue team members disembarked, Raven was shocked to discover that the leader was none other than the mutants' archenemy, Colonel Stryker. The shockwave from the sonic weapon knocked most of the group unconscious. Only Cyclops, Gray, and Nightcrawler, who had hidden in the ruins beforehand, managed to avoid it. Under Stryker's orders, the soldiers captured Moira, Beast, Quicksilver, and Raven one by one. After capturing the main targets, they conducted a thorough search of every corner of the ruins. Gray used her telepathy to create a visual blind spot. When the soldiers scanned the area, it seemed as if they saw nothing, allowing the group to narrowly escape. As the helicopter prepared to take off, Nightcrawler immediately teleported Cyclops and Gray aboard, planning to secretly rescue their captured comrades. However, the helicopter's brainwave shielding system interfered with mutants' powers, and Gray's telepathy was affected. After a period of flight, the helicopter finally landed at Stryker's secret base. There, he imprisoned Raven and the others in special cages designed to suppress their powers. Moira tried to use her position as a high-ranking agent to persuade Stryker to release them, but he remained unmoved. Unaware of the truth, Stryker mistakenly believed that Professor X was responsible for the nuclear launch and considered Moira and the others to be his accomplices. Even though Raven explained Apocalypse's plan, Stryker ignored her. At the same time, the three who had escaped the helicopter stealthily infiltrated the secret base. Just as they were deep in the enemy's territory, Professor's voice suddenly rang in their ears. It turned out that Apocalypse was forcing Professor to send a death declaration to both humans and mutants worldwide. The message was clear: mutants would once again become the rulers of the world. And before the new era arrived, everyone had to make a choice: either submit unconditionally or face destruction. However, Apocalypse was unaware that Professor had secretly given the three a hint about his exact location, but the next second, the three were discovered by patrolling soldiers. Gunshots echoed into the control room, and Stryker immediately ordered the guards to capture them. In the chaos, they accidentally found themselves near the power plant, which was the perfect spot to destroy the base's power and rescue Raven and the others. As they prepared to act, a deep growl suddenly came from a massive iron cage next to the generator, as though something inside was agitated. Gray, using her sharp sensory abilities, realized that a very powerful mutant was likely imprisoned inside. Just then, soldiers entered the room, and the three quickly hid behind the cage. Gray quietly used telekinesis to unlock the cage's door. The base's alarm system blared as the iron door slowly opened, revealing a formidable figure none other than Wolverine. Since the days of future past event, Wolverine had been captured by Stryker, subjected to experiments, and his bones replaced with unbreakable adamantium. Losing part of his memory, the panicked soldiers wildly fired their guns, but their attempts had no effect on Wolverine, who possessed an extraordinary healing factor. In fact, The bullets only served to fuel his rage. After enduring countless experiments and unimaginable tortures, Wolverine had been severely traumatized, and in his frenzy, he unleashed a murderous rampage. He quickly turned the entire experimental facility into a sea of blood. Stryker, witnessing the carnage in the control room, seized the opportunity to escape. With Wolverine leading the way, the three were able to move through the base without any obstruction. In gratitude, Gray used her abilities to help restore Wolverine's lost memories, gradually calming him from his berserk state. After removing the experimental devices from his body, Wolverine chose not to join the fight with them. Instead, he silently left. After saying their goodbyes, the three made their way to the specially designed cages and rescued Raven and the others. Cyclops fired a powerful energy beam, creating an escape route through the prison wall, successfully freeing their comrades. As they hurriedly fled, they stumbled upon dozens of advanced fighter jets and flight gear in an inconspicuous warehouse. With time running out, they quickly suited up and flew toward Cairo, Egypt. At this moment, Apocalypse was preparing to initiate the final phase of his plan. He intended to possess Professor's telepathic abilities, so he could more swiftly and thoroughly control all humans on Earth and achieve his tyrannical rule. Before this, however, Apocalypse needed to build a pyramid capable of absorbing solar energy. This was an indispensable step in his process of transferring his consciousness. He regarded himself as a god, controlling everything in the world. With just a thought, the skyscrapers in the city were instantly shattered by an invisible force, turning into dust and sand flying in the air. The people could only watch helplessly as their homes were reduced to rubble. Everything, all materials, were rearranged and reorganized under Apocalypse's will. In an instant, the entire city, like a mirage, vanished, and a breathtaking pyramid rose from the ground, standing tall in its place. All mutants and humans must unconditionally obey Apocalypse's will. He then created a special helmet for his most trusted ally, Magneto. This helmet not only effectively shielded Professor X's telepathy but also allowed Magneto to focus better on using his magnetic powers, amplifying his abilities to their fullest extent. At Apocalypse's command, Magneto began to release his magnetic force to the maximum, using his powers like mental tendrils to sense and control the global magnetic fields. Metals like iron, nickel, and cobalt erupted from the Earth's surface, even controlling submarines deep within the Earth's core. Like metal sea serpents, they rose into the sky, with massive cargo ships slowly lifting into the air. Gigantic steel bridges were uprooted. If this destruction continued, the land might hold for a while, but before long, the civilization that humans had built would be utterly destroyed in a single night. The death toll would reach billions. At this point, Professor X had already been placed on the consciousness transfer device. Apocalypse's ultimate goal was to conquer the world and reshape the global order, making mutants the rulers of the Earth. Professor X's abilities were the key element of this plan. If successful, Apocalypse would be able to recruit and identify more mutants by using Professor's telepathic powers. This was crucial for Apocalypse to build an invincible army of mutants. In addition, Professor's abilities would play an indispensable role in controlling human minds. Apocalypse could use it to infiltrate human consciousness, eliminate their resistance to mutants, and make them willingly accept mutant rule. What excited him even more was that the full potential of Professor's powers was beyond even Apocalypse's understanding. This meant that after possessing him, his powers would undergo ultimate evolution, entering an entirely new realm. Apocalypse eagerly placed the pyramid's apex on top. As the sunlight hit it, the pyramid's surfaces began to absorb solar energy, converting it into power that flowed slowly toward the consciousness transfer platform inside the pyramid. Next, Apocalypse activated his powers and began extracting his consciousness from his own body, connecting it with Professor's body via a golden conductive ring. During this process, Professor felt immense mental pressure and pain. The two consciousnesses began an intense battle on the mental plane. However, Apocalypse's consciousness was far stronger, and Professor's brain and nervous system were quickly eroded. Next, Apocalypse only needed to completely eliminate Professor's consciousness and take over entirely. At the critical moment, the rescue team's aircraft finally reached the battlefield. However, what they saw was complete devastation. The entire city was enveloped in Magneto's powerful magnetic storm. The scale and severity of the destruction far exceeded their expectations. To avoid having their aircraft destroyed, they could only remain at the edge of the battlefield. With time running out and the situation dire, the team quickly devised their strategy and swiftly began dividing tasks. Quicksilver, with Raven, skillfully maneuvered through Magneto's metal domain, using the airborne metal debris as stepping stones to reach Magneto. However, countless small metal particles around Magneto formed an impenetrable magnetic shield. The two could not get through, so Raven resorted to appealing to Magneto's emotions, asking him to let go of his past hatred and focus on his surviving family. As she spoke, she turned her gaze toward Quicksilver, but in a critical moment, he faltered and couldn't summon the courage to acknowledge his father. Fortunately, Raven's words began to reach Magneto, causing his resolve to waver. Meanwhile, Gray, Cyclops, and Beast were planning to infiltrate the pyramid and rescue the others, but they were spotted by the horsemen, and Gray immediately used telekinesis to block their attacks with nearby objects. Nightcrawler took the chance to teleport inside the pyramid, but the interior of the building, like a bow, was so convoluted that he lost his bearings immediately. Suddenly, the sky thundered as Storm joined the battle. She raised both arms, summoning a wild storm, and controlled the winds to hurl cars like missiles toward the three. Beast, with his immense strength, withstood the attack. Cyclops immediately removed his glasses and retaliated. With a mighty roar, Beast unleashed explosive force, swinging the car toward the Storm. Just as Storm seemed to be overwhelmed, the car was suddenly cleaved in half by a pink energy blast. After being saved, Storm immediately summoned lightning to fight back. Unable to resist, the three were forced to scatter, losing their numerical advantage. In a moment of desperation, Beast had no choice but to face off against Psylocke one-on-one. While Beast was extraordinarily intelligent, his fighting methods were limited. He relied more on his formidable physical abilities to protect himself. In contrast to Beast's limitations, Psylocke could form various weapons using her telepathic powers. Thanks to Apocalypse's enhancements, these psychic weapons could easily cut through or pierce any material. Just as Psylocke was about to deliver a fatal blow, Beast broke free at the last moment. He then performed a suplex, throwing Psylocke onto the top of a nearby ruined building. With Gray urging him on, Nightcrawler accelerated, but Angel was hot on his tail. He frequently used teleportation to escape, but Angel was relentless, clinging to his tail. After a fierce chase, Nightcrawler finally found an opening. He cleverly led Angel into a steel cage, trapping him inside. Once the trouble was dealt with, Nightcrawler quickly returned to the palace. Professor X, under Apocalypse's torment, was pushed to the limits of both his mind and body. When Nightcrawler found him, he had lost all his hair and had fallen into a deep coma. He dared not waste time and immediately rescued Professor, sending him back to the aircraft. The battle between Cyclops and Storm was like lightning striking the earth, with both sides using their full strength, making it impossible to determine a winner. Having secured Professor, Nightcrawler suddenly appeared, using teleportation to help Cyclops escape from the intense battle. Beast, who was fighting Psylocke, was also brought to safety. Their mission was complete, and continuing the fight would only result in unnecessary casualties, so they prepared to retreat and reassess their next move. Just as Beast started the aircraft's engine, preparing to escape the dangerous location, the unconscious Angel suddenly woke up. He broke free from the steel cage's restraints, and Psylocke, without hesitation, leaped from the high building. With their perfect coordination, they successfully jumped onto the aircraft that was about to take off and began causing widespread damage to its surface. To ensure Professor was unharmed, Gray instructed Nightcrawler to lead everyone to safety. However, he had never tried to teleport so many people at once. This not only drained his physical and mental energy but also posed significant difficulty and risk. But there was no time to hesitate. After everyone grabbed onto Nightcrawler, Psylocke created an opening in the aircraft's surface. Angel immediately jumped into the cabin, and Gray quickly used her telekinesis to push the control stick forward. The nose of the aircraft began diving toward the ground. Just as it seemed they would crash, Nightcrawler unleashed an unprecedented burst of potential. Just in time, he successfully teleported the five of them to safety before Angel could reach them. Realizing that all hope was lost, Psylocke reluctantly released her grip. Tears in her eyes, she used a telekinetic light blade to pierce the wall, slowing her fall. Despite her efforts, the impact was still enormous, and she crashed to the ground, falling unconscious. Professor and the others were safe, but Nightcrawler, after teleporting 5 people, also lost consciousness due to the extreme physical and mental strain. Meanwhile, Quicksilver and Raven were still waiting for Magneto's response, hoping he would change his mind. Magneto struggled in his memories, recalling the days when he and Professor fought for the future of mutants. He remembered their shared ideal of peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans, which caused him great inner conflict. At that moment, Apocalypse, who had been interrupted during the reincarnation ritual, woke up. Upon discovering that Professor had been taken, his rage reached an unprecedented level. Apocalypse emerged from the pyramid. Indifferent to Angel's death in front of him, he began using his powerful telepathy to cross the spatial barrier. Calling out to the weakened Professor, he knew Professor was still nearby, and though the ritual had been interrupted, part of his consciousness still lingered, leaving a faint mental link between them. It wouldn't be long before Professor's location was revealed. Suddenly, it felt as though the entire world had been paused. Quicksilver appeared before Apocalypse like a flash of lightning. Then, a rapid and powerful barrage of strikes followed, leaving Apocalypse no chance to retaliate. However, being an ancient mutant who had existed for thousands of years, Apocalypse quickly adapted to Quicksilver's super speed. Soon, he was able to match Quicksilver's speed and capture his movements. Each of Quicksilver's actions began to appear extremely slow to Apocalypse, who used sand to bind Quicksilver's ankles, rendering him helpless. Under Apocalypse's absolute control, he leisurely walked up to Quicksilver, cruelly breaking one of his arms and then kicking his other leg out of joint. At that moment, the revived Psylocke appeared. Apocalypse ordered her to finish off Quicksilver, but in a shocking turn of events, Psylocke turned her blade on Apocalypse. Unfortunately, Apocalypse had already gained regenerative abilities, and the small wound quickly healed. With his grip tightening around her throat, Apocalypse's force caused Raven to revert to her true form, unable to maintain her disguise any longer due to the excruciating pain. Not far away, Storm, witnessing the hero she had once admired being overpowered by Apocalypse, began to feel immense inner conflict and started questioning her decision to follow Apocalypse and aid in his evil plans. In the moment of Raven's life-threatening peril, Professor quickly devised a plan. He realized he could use the mental connection established with Apocalypse to reverse the flow, bringing Apocalypse's mind into a mental domain of his own making. When Professor's telepathic abilities first awakened, he was overwhelmed by the thoughts and emotions of those around him. The intensity of these emotions forced him to endure the pain and negativity of others. Professor sent these emotions to Apocalypse without reservation, forcing him to experience the same torment. Soon, Apocalypse collapsed. Overwhelmed and dizzy, Professor thought victory was within reach, but Apocalypse's willpower was incredibly resilient. Within moments, he adapted to the mental pain Professor had inflicted on him. As Apocalypse's form grew larger, he slowly regained control, turning the tables and beginning to take over. Professor's carefully crafted plan had turned into a trap, and he found himself in an impossible situation. At the same time, their hiding place was completely exposed. As the situation rapidly deteriorated, two massive steel beams fell from the sky, forming an X symbol. The one controlling them was Magneto. With Magneto manipulating the magnetic fields, the surrounding metal quickly formed a tidal wave, rushing toward Apocalypse. Apocalypse quickly activated his force field, withstanding the pressure while continuing to advance. Cyclops immediately removed his glasses and fired a devastating optic blast. Despite taking the brunt of both attacks, Apocalypse remained unfazed, handling the pressure effortlessly while simultaneously applying immense psychic pressure on Professor. Apocalypse planned to torment him until the last breath before starting the reincarnation ritual. Despite being severely wounded, Professor gently encouraged Grey to unleash her full powers. He told her not to worry about the consequences and to give everything she had. At this point, Cyclops' energy had been depleted due to the rapid consumption of his powers. The prolonged use of his optic blasts had also caused damage to the muscles around his eyes. Apocalypse seized this opening, delivering a powerful strike that sent him flying and embedded him into the wall. In the end, only Magneto remained, still struggling to hold the line. Apocalypse didn't even glance at the traitor, focusing solely on advancing toward Professor. At that moment, Grey confidently stepped into Professor's mental domain. Grey's Phoenix Force is one of the oldest and most powerful forces in the universe. If uncontrolled, this force could instantly sweep across the cosmos, destroying everything in its path. When Grey unleashed the Phoenix's power without restraint, an unimaginable surge of energy shattered the impenetrable armor surrounding Apocalypse. Even his consciousness was crushed and dissolved, and his body, under such overwhelming force, became fragile and easily shattered. Seeing this, Magneto quickly manipulated the magnetic fields, driving nearby metal objects into Apocalypse's body like a rain of sharp needles. Cyclops, now freed, immediately joined in, delivering a powerful strike. Severely wounded, Apocalypse began gathering massive amounts of energy, attempting to open a portal to escape, but Storm interfered with her lightning powers, causing the portal to collapse. Apocalypse was forced to face Gray's Phoenix power head-on. The Force not only destroyed his body but also shattered his spirit. It was then that Apocalypse realized that he was the false god, and it was Gray who was crushing him. That was the true, undefeatable supreme being. Ultimately, Apocalypse, filled with endless resentment, turned to ash and disappeared into the vast atmosphere. As everything settled, this landmark battle gave humanity a more comprehensive understanding of mutants' existence and powers. It also changed their attitude toward mutants. With Magneto and Gray's joint efforts, the X-Mansion was quickly rebuilt from the rubble and soon returned to its former state. However, Magneto still held onto his mistrust and suspicion of humans, while Professor X continued to uphold the belief in peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans. Though they had differences, their understanding and respect for each other deepened after the battle for survival. After Magneto left, Professor officially formed the X-Men, and Raven returned to the Academy as a mentor. In the high-tech micromirror training room, the new generation of X-Men began their practical simulation training with the original prototype Sentinel robots. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.